Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. My name is Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I welcome you to join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation on the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page or access additional VIP content as a premium subscriber via Patreon. For just a couple of dollars a month, you can get an early access to episodes, additional bonus content, and your chance to connect with my guests. To do so, simply visit patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. Let's Talk Near Death. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Today I'm joined by Artisha Bolding, who's based in Georgia in the US. And Artisha's had an amazing near-death experience. She's had some out-of-body experiences as well. So Artisha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kirsty. It's so exciting to be here.
It's great. I'm excited by the conversation. So Artisha, tell us a little bit about your near-death experience. What was going on in your life and what was happening to make that experience come to pass?
Well, out of nowhere, I had a sudden onset of illness with no medical history, no family history. I was actually working on a construction site at the time. I'm a glossy girl. I love, lipstick and hair extensions, all of that. But at the time, I was working in a nuclear power facility warehouse on a construction site, lots of hours. And I thought that I was coming down with, a bad case of allergies, hay fever. I just started to feel bad. And of course, the first thing you think about is you're working too much, you're not eating the right thing, you need to change some things. But never in a million years did I anticipate what was to happen. So from the fall of 2017 to the spring of 2018, I would be hospitalized 4 times. And though I was young and healthy, I didn't even have a primary care physician at the time. I never went to the doctor, never had any problems. I was going into simultaneous respiratory failure and cardiac failure.
Oh,
So,
wow.
right, it was a very, very scary time for me and my family. So, that first hospitalization, where again, I thought that this was maybe allergies, maybe spinning into a chest cold, I actually had double pneumonia.
Oh, okay.
Both of my lungs were all but completely filled with fluid, and I was essentially drowning on my own fluids, gasping for air. It was terrible. So, having to navigate all of the things with, the healthcare networks and things here in the US, just began to try to work through some of those things. But this all came to a head in the spring, which was my longest hospital stay. And I actually was in the ICU and went into a coma. I found out after the fact that I was out for about 2 days. But during that time, Kirsty, I have to tell you, on the outside, it was very scary what was happening, even the ins and outs of it, having been in and out of the hospital. But when I died, and that because, I flatlined, the medical records show it, and I know that I was no longer, alive in my earthly physical form as I knew it. When that happened, when I actually left my body and my spirit began to travel, I experienced a euphoria and a peace that I have never known before or since. It was almost magical. And what I realized after, and just kind of thinking and the details coming back to me, I didn't know at the time what was actually going on in my physical body, but I went to this place with the most vibrant, colorful, beautiful aroma producing flowers. It was just like a never ending garden. And I was like, okay, this is it. So it was sort of a dual consciousness,
Mm.
if you will. In the present, I could see and feel what was happening in a spirit sort of being, but I did know that I had a past experience in a physical form, if that makes sense. Do
Yeah.
you kind of follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you weren't aware that you'd been in a body.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I was
Okay.
aware that I had been in a body before. And so the question for me was, okay, is this heaven? What's happening? Where's everybody else? Because where I was in this particular part of the experience, no one else was. And what I remember most is just me being absolutely serene and completely overjoyed to be there. Didn't know what was happening, couldn't completely identify where I was at the time, but I just knew that I was very happy to be there and I just
Mm.
wanted more of it. I wanted to see, okay, what is happening? What is this all about? So that was one part of it. And I had some transitions to different places. Unfortunately, I don't have a memory of how the transition took place. Like, I don't remember coming back into consciousness physically
Mm.
here and then going back in. I don't remember a back and forth, but I just remember these vivid pieces of it. And besides that experience, what really, really stayed with me that I can say was pivotal and life changing for me was when my spirit actually traveled to two foreign countries. And with that, the first place that I went was actually still here in the US. And again, in the consciousness at the time, I I identified it as kind of middle America, maybe Midwestern. And I was in a convenience store, but I was looking at the scene. I wasn't present there. I was not able to interact with anyone there, nor they me. And I could just see people coming in. They were buying things, like soda, magazines, snacks, things like that. And again, I was questioning, okay, what does this mean? Why am I here? And with that, again, just a peace, not a worry, not a fear or anything, just being able to observe these people living and going about their lives. And I felt like, okay, this is something that I want to know more about what's going on here, what's happening. So there were folks who were dressed, in trucker caps and flannel and things like that. And they looked
Mm.
like they may have been going to work or things like that. And they just seemed to be happy. There was no malice in any of the scenes. And so that is something that stayed with me. It's just like, okay, regular, normal life, no malice, no stress, living, being, going, moving forward. So that was the messaging that I was receiving. So I said, okay, there has to be more. And indeed, there was more. The other scene was in a place that I, in the time, identified as the Caribbean.
Okay.
And in this particular scene, these people, they were at a party, like a big blowout celebration. They had beautiful clothing and vibrant colors, and they were having the best time. The music was loud. Everyone was having a really, really good time and just completely in the moment. And again, I was observing, they did not see me and couldn't interact with me, nor could I them. And so when I came back to settle, not awakened yet, but just processing in what I've come to now call as sort of like a spiritual pause, if you will, and just kind of processing the information, was these people from completely different cultures, completely different walks of life, but they were living, they were enjoying themselves, and they weren't stressed, because that was the exact opposite of the life that I was living at the current time. And one thing that I want to share too, I'm a woman of faith. I was raised in a Christian church. I have very strong Christian belief, but I pride myself on being very inclusive. I always like to learn about other cultures and spiritual practices and things
Yeah.
like that. And in this particular scene, with the Caribbean party. It was almost like a rave. I mean, it was huge and there was so much excitement there. But one thing that I keep saying, one thing is so many things. One thing that stood out to me was there were several people who were gender fluid, and they were very comfortable in themselves, and there was just no judgment. And that is the messaging that I got from both of these very different scenes, very different experiences. I knew that moving forward, I had to get myself into a place where I would not hold judgment, even secretly, with folks, and that I had to find a way to de-stress my life, to experience joy and share joy with others. That was the messaging, and I must say it has absolutely changed me forever.
Oh, I bet it has. I bet it has. Artisha, thank you for sharing that. There's quite a lot in there. So I want to come back.
Yes.
I want to ask you the outer body experiences that you talked about when you're traveling to these different places and you're viewing what's going on rather than being a part of it.
Yes.
How they're separate to your NDE, aren't they?
It's separate, but for me, the connection is because it happened all around the same time, because it was literally within this few days of this last hospital stay. It all happened within the same couple of days. To the point, it's very hard for me to separate at what time it occurred and what day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally does. And that actually just answered
Mhm.
my next question of how long after your NDE did these take place. So you were in the hospital at the time, they all took place around about the same time. And your near-death experience, you remember being up in this beautiful garden with these flowers and the aromas and all the bright colors and just feeling so happy there.
Mhm.
Did you meet anybody there? Did you experience any beings, or were you alone for the whole time?
I actually did encounter three significant spiritual beings. I know some people connect with family members or things like that. That was not my experience. The three beings, only one of them could I make out a face, if you will.
Uh-huh.
The one being that communicated with me directly was a feminine being, and she comforted me when I came to. This wasn't the garden scene. This was, I don't know what this actual place was. It was almost like a care facility, maybe almost like a processing facility.
Uh-huh.
Like, this is where the people that come in, and it was almost as if she was doing an intake, if you will.
Right.
And
Okay.
so there was this feminine being There was a taller, stronger, masculine being there with her. And then there was a third being who was there observing, and more so observing the other two beings than me. And the third being did not communicate at all. And I couldn't even identify it as feminine, masculine, or what, but it was just a spiritual being.
Uh-huh.
But the feminine being, who was beautiful, she had beautiful dark curly hair, and she was so caring to me. So when I arrived at this place, she was there, she was looking over me, and I was I wasn't lying completely down. I was in maybe almost a reclined position though. And she was looking at me, and I was crying with joy. I was so overwhelmed that I was here, wherever here was.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so absolutely delighted to be there. And she was just comforting me. And I was also still trying to process what was happening to me. So I don't want to say it was fear, but it was not knowing, if you will, and just wanting to understand. And so she was really comforting me and consoling me and saying, everything is okay. You are fine. Everything's okay. We're going to take care of you. And I was immediately okay. And again, I just felt such peace and serenity in being there with her and with the other two beings. And in just a few short moments, it was not long at all, in just a few short moments, I was completely consoled, completely fine. And she looked at me again, and she looked at the second being, the more masculine one. And I don't know what they were saying to each other, but they were communicating. And she looked at me and she said, "You can't stay." And my eyes just got really big. I
Mm.
looked at her with shock, like, "What do you mean I can't
Yeah.
stay?" And she smiled, and she held my hand, and she touched my heart. And that was if she was sending me along. And that was it. I I wasn't there anymore.
Wow, that must have been quite devastating, I imagine.
It was. It
Yeah.
was. So it was such a roller coaster to go from such joy and peace and excitement to, wait a minute, what?
Yeah. So do you remember next thing you woke up? Is that what happened next?
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
remember traveling back to your body?
I do not. I do not. It was as if I woke up and I was just physically present again.
Right.
I don't remember going through any sort of process or what have you. I just remember waking up, and it was I must say, it was very emotional, because at the time I was actually in the ICU, still not processing what was going on in the present and now, realizing that these were two different scenes and two different planes, if you will,
Mm.
but not realizing what was actually going on. So let me tell you what I communicated with my family at the time. So when the whole thing started, and then, now mind you, this is Mother's Day of last year, and I'm at my mom's house. Because of the health challenges and everything, mom had to step in and be my primary caregiver. So, she's making sure that I'm taking medication,
Mm.
and I'm going to doctor's appointments when I need to go, and making sure I have meals and all that sort of
Mm.
thing. So um, I did know that my health was failing. I knew something was wrong at mom's house because everything was different. My body just wasn't functioning right. And if I'm honest, I had gotten into a very depressive state, and I really just wanted it all to be over. And anyone that knows me knows that's not me. I'm a fighter. I don't give up. I don't take no for an answer.
Mm.
I don't give in easy at all. But I felt like I was at the mercy of the medication. And at that time, an actual oxygen machine, oxygen tank. I couldn't
Mhm.
even breathe on my own. And so I said, you know what? If I just disconnect this machine and if I skip out on a couple of pills, I can be done. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to stress my family out.
Wow.
I can just be done. So it was really, really awful. But once I actually had to be taken to the hospital, I knew that I was dying, and I really thought that it was over, to the point that when I was in more of an alert state, I was calling and texting folks and telling them to come to the hospital to say goodbye. And I was telling my mom, like, you better tell cousin so and so and
Oh.
aunt so and so to come see me, because this is it. So the whole experience was kind of traumatic as well, because I literally thought that God was just allowing me to say goodbye to everyone. I thought it was over. That's what I had
Mm.
asked for, and I thought it was done.
Mm. And so you obviously didn't die. What happened there? You recovered?
Thankfully, I did. I am very excited. I laugh as I say that, because it's my life is really night and day from then until now. So once my spirit returned to my body, and I really felt like I had been given a mission, almost like, Martin Luther nailing the message onto the church. I felt like, okay, I'm back here in a present body. I'm getting finally the treatment that I need. I am feeling rejuvenated and energized. I know now that my life is no longer the same. And I know that I've been released back here to help folks. So, what I share with folks is because I spent the bulk of this particular time in my life chasing money in a soulless job, completely neglecting family, friends, no civic responsibility other than, the taxes that are being taken out of my check, and,
Mm.
voting when
Mm.
the election times come. I wasn't doing anything of any good rapport. And so that's what I tell clients, friends, and anyone who will listen. Don't let the universe have to bring you to a standstill like it did for me. Take time, get still, and find out what it is that you are purposed and called to do. Because if you don't, chances are you're not going to like the results of how you have to come to the understanding if you don't take time to do it yourself.
Mm. Oh, I totally agree. I absolutely love that message. So you talked about how you knew what your mission was. Are you happy to share what your mission is, what you're working
Oh,
on?
yes. So my thing is conquering great things with purpose, passion, and power. That is my business motto as well as my life motto. So a lot of people contact me who want to write books themselves. I'm an author, so I get a lot of messaging and things from aspiring authors, aspiring entrepreneurs, or career changers. So those are the primary folks that I work with. But the message that I share with everyone is you are sent to the earth with a unique assignment and calling. It's almost always something that you're already naturally good at, something that folks are naturally drawn to you in regards to. So, even if you aren't blessed enough to be able to do that and make your living at it, you have to carve out time and space to do those things. And that's a part of what I call soul work. So, we have to feed our soul and do that soul work so that we remain in healthy bodies as well as healthy souls. So That is my mission, to get people to live on purpose and in purpose.
Oh, I love that. Live on purpose and in purpose. Artisha, you touched briefly on your spiritual beliefs. How have they changed following your experiences, and how influential have your experiences been in your spiritual beliefs?
With this near death experience, what I came out understanding better than ever is the power in my voice, the power in your voice and individual voices. I know now more than ever that I am the architect of my life. And if I don't like my life, I have the power to change it. And the
Mm,
first place that starts is in my mind, but it has to also filter out through my mouth. I have to speak it if I want to see it. And that's the power of creative voice. And I talk about that in my book. That has changed my life more than anything, because to go from being on 8 different medications with the prescribed oxygen down to about 3 medications now within 18 months is a huge, huge deal.
mm,
And I saw the physical manifestation of speaking affirmations and thinking positively. That has been totally life altering for me. So that is what completely changed, because my life was so different, again, having to be so heavily medicated and deal with those things. So I had to make a change and do some things different. And it started mentally and spiritually.
mm. Have you ever, well, you must have wondered, why did this happen to me?
Yes. I want, especially during um, even going up to that final hospital stay, I did not understand at the time, if I'm honest, before the actual near death experience. I took it as completely physical. I took it as very face value. So I think, kind of like Oprah says, it'll start with a little pebble or a little rock. Then, if you don't get the message, it starts with a brick through the window. And then, if you still don't get the message, that's when the whole wall just kind of comes tumbling down, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean. So it's kind of like knock, 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 pay attention.
Uh-huh.
So, what I've come to believe is that I've always had this calling, and I know, had I not had that ultimate standstill, that time to get quiet and say, what is the mark that I wanted to leave in the world? I know I'm not, I don't want to say that I'm thankful for the sickness, because that just kind of sounds weird, right? But I'm thankful for the time that I got through the sickness to be still, to meditate more, and to get out of the just overly stressful and not fulfilling day to day workspace that
Mm,
I was in.
mm,
And so I believe that the work that I'm doing now, helping people to understand their purpose and calling, helping them to understand that they are the architect of their lives and that they are more in control than they think. I know that that is why I had to go through what I went through, even though it was awful.
mm. I can kind of relate to that a little bit with my story as well, of going through major illness and then whatever happens after that, and then having to learn how to do things again. So I understand that.
Yeah. hmm
At what point, at what point did you know that you were dead or dying in your NDE?
When I knew that I had died was when I was with the spiritual beings. I knew that something was different. And so, again, it was always sort of a dual consciousness. Like, I'm very excited to be here. I'm very conscious of what I just left and what I went through. And in fact, this is what I prayed for. I prayed to leave that realm and come into what I believe is this one. So I thought that was the end. And again, I felt like I was in an intake process. I
Mm.
thought that was done. And, I would see my family no more, but I was very excited to communicate and congregate with these spiritual beings and to see what this next phase would be about, to see if there are pearly gates and streets of gold and all of
Yeah.
that. I was very curious as to that. And I knew my life had ended, but I had no idea that it was temporary. I had no
Right.
idea that it was temporary and that I would have to go back and do work.
Yeah.
I immediately knew that I had a mission. I started to journal right there in the hospital, and I started to turn things around right there. So it was kind of like, hey, whatever dark forces they tried to get me, they missed. So now I'm going to be a force of light and a force to be reckoned with.
And these beings that you saw, did you recognize them? Did they have facial features, or what could you see?
What I could see with the feminine being that was closest to me, that communicated with me and touched me, I could see her facial features. So I could see the beautiful hair, and I could see that she had eyes, a nose, a mouth, eyebrows, and everything like that. But the other two beings, I couldn't make out any facial features. I just recognized one of the beings was um, a larger, more masculine, dominant presence, but he did not communicate with me at all. But I just noticed him there.
Mm.
And then the same with the third being.
And was there any kind of communication? Did you converse in any way?
I conversed with this feminine being who I could see more clearly. And as she spoke to me, she first comforted me when I came in because I was crying almost uncontrollably. And she wanted me to kind of settle down. But she seemed as happy to see me as I was to see her. But again, that was a short moment because as soon as she was able to get me to kind of calm down and understand that I was in a safe place and everything was fine and that she was going to make sure that I was fine, it was just a few moments later where she was telling me that I had to go back. And
Mm.
I immediately was like, what do you mean I have to go back? And she didn't explain. She just sort of touched me and sent me on my way.
Yeah, wow. You talked about how you were in the flower garden and then you were in
hmm
this place, the what we call the intake place. Do you
hmm
remember traveling from one to another?
I do not remember traveling from one to another, so to speak. But what I do remember, I don't want to leave this out, because again, this process of my health sort of failing and me kind of going down, it began at my mom's house, and I could feel it. I knew something was changing. And I also had prayed for this. So I was scared, but this is what I wanted. I felt like, okay, this is going to be my journey to the afterlife. This is going to be
Mm.
it. And so before I actually went in the hospital, when I was at mom's house praying for death, which is so terrible, but that's what it was at the time. I remember my heartbeat changing, my breathing changed, like everything just sort of slowed down. Everything began to happen in slow motion. And that is when I believe my spirit began to travel, but it didn't make the full journey until I was completely unconscious, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that part, in my recollection, didn't happen until I was in the hospital. And also, it's so strange, and my sister had to even tell me this part because I didn't realize I was actually in um, a designated waiting area in the hospital. I wasn't even actually fully checked in to the hospital when this started. I was actually waiting for my particular doctor because I had such a serious case and it was dealing with my heart and lungs.
Mm-hmm.
They are very particular and they don't just let kind of any doctor or nurse deal with you. They want the specialist.
Mm.
They want to avoid lawsuits. That's what we know. That's what it
Yeah.
is. But I was laying on a bed, and I when I woke up, it was 2 days later, and I was actually in the ICU. So this all took place during that space in time. So I don't remember the particular transitions from the garden to this other place where I was alone with the spirit beings, but I do remember transitioning sort of in and out of actual consciousness in dealing with the health challenge.
Mm, mm. And what was life like for you when you immediately woke up? So you woke up in the ICU. Did you remember your experience? What was going through your mind at that point?
I did. I immediately remembered it, and I was I was scared, and I was actually a little upset. I was upset that I had to be back in this ailing body
I'm sure.
because, again, at this time, this was the height of the illness. So there are literally tubes everywhere. I mean, in
Yeah.
my arteries, in my arm, in my nose, everything. And I began to cry. And one of the nurses came in and she asked me, she said, "Are you okay? Did you have a bad dream?" And I was not getting ready to get into this whole story with her.
Yeah.
So I just nodded yes. And she was so sweet, bless her heart. She wiped my tears and, she kind of held my hand for a moment. And even in that time, just kind of her exchange of care and love, I said, okay, if we have to do this, if I'm back here, it's going to be about light and love. And that's what it's been about since then.
Artisha Bolding, thank you so much for sharing your message, sharing your experience, well, your experiences, I should say. And it's just fantastic. I love that you talk about the flowers and the colors and the aroma. And I think it's going to be the most beautiful place. So thank you
Yes.
for being vulnerable. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, tell people about it. I'd love to get these messages out there. Don't forget you can also pick up your VIP access pass for additional content at patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. You can connect with us via the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page, and I look forward to catching you for another episode soon.